Plateau is a vast, semi-arid region of the northwestern United States that exists in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. The lower Columbia area of the plateau consists of the river's watersheds between the Priest Rapids and the Dalles, excluding the Snake River. In addition to the main channel of the Columbia River with its multitude of rock art sites, the region includes the basins of Yakima, John Day, and Deschutes rivers, in each of which rock art sites are plentiful. The Dalles-Deschutes region is the center of the Columbia Plateau. The area is dominated by massive basalt cliffs that line the river and large meso-like buttes. The region marks the end of the lower Columbia Plateau. Pacific Northwest rock art is primarily naturalistic, with some exceptions being the Long Narrows and Yakima polychrome styles, localized in the lower Columbia area near the Dalles, Oregon, and a few pit and groove style sites scattered throughout the region. Most Columbia Plateau rock art shows simple stick figure humans and block body animal figures, rayed circles or arcs, and tally marks. Dating from approximately the last 1,000 years, rock art shows an increasing stylization of the human form that culminates in the portrayal of humans and spirit beings as complex, masked designs, often with grotesquely exaggerated features. Some animal forms also become more stylized, and rayed arcs and concentric circles become major components. Presumably, Northwest Coast art traditions, which show a somewhat similar evolution of stylization, heavily influenced these two styles. Quite likely, the Columbia River's use as a major prehistoric trade route from the coast to the interior was partly responsible for the evolution of this stylized art in the Dalles region. Let's try defining rock art. Throughout the literature, a definition of rock art stays relatively elusive. So, I will paraphrase the first few chapters of Powerful Pictures, Rock Art Research Histories Around the World. Rock art is material culture, symbolic, multifunctional, and in form, it's engraved or painted. To continue defining rock art, we'll explain petroglyphs and pictographs. Petroglyphs are rock engravings made with a variety of techniques, and pictographs are rock paintings. Let's talk about some styles you might find in the lower Columbia area. Styles might include the Yakima polychrome style, the Long Narrow style, the North Oregon rectilinear style, and the Central Columbia Plateau style. Additionally, there's the Columbia Plateau scratch style. Motifs found at lower Columbia rock art sites can be divided into 10 descriptive categories. These are humans, faces, mythical beings, animals, bear tracks, rayed arcs and circles, polychrome rayed figures, geometric forms, stars, and tally marks. The Yakima polychrome style consists primarily, more than 90% at some sites, of red and white polychrome pictographs of arc faces, rayed arcs, and rayed circles. Stickmen with rayed heads and a few abstract red and white human figures are also observed. The Long Narrow style consists of grinning faces, curvilinear abstracts, elaborate concentric spoked or rayed circles, and abstract human and animal forms with eyes, ribs, and internal organs depicted. Many of these zoomorphic or anthropomorphic figures apparently represent mythical beings or water monsters. Faces, often wearing hats, have broad grinning mouths, ears, and concentric circle eyes. The most famous of these is She Who Watches. The North Oregon rectilinear style occurs primarily as red pictographs of simple stick figure humans and animals, lizards, tally marks, and numerous rectilinear abstracts. In this latter category are rectangles, ribbed figures, grids, zigzags, crosses, circles, chevrons, rakes, and ladder figures often combined with one another to form elaborate mazes. These rectilinear abstracts make up more than 50% of the paintings at sites of this style in North Oregon's Deschutes and John Day River basins. The Central Columbia Plateau style in the lower Columbia area, as in these other parts of the region, consist of stick figure humans, simple rayed arcs and rayed circles, and block body animal figures. Animals are mainly simple, spread-eagled thunderbirds, mountain sheep, and deer. Many humans have rayed heads or rayed arc headdress. The Columbia Plateau scratched style is defined as scratched motifs, modified cracks, and modified edges. Scratches are found as ordered groups that form recognizable recurring motifs. There are some naturalistic representations, scratched abstracts, and anthropomorphic figures. Scratched images can be lightly incised lines to deeply incised, and sometimes polished lines resulting from repeated strokes. There is also a curvilinear abstract art called the pit and groove style that can be occasionally found on the Columbia Plateau and the lower Columbia portion. These photos are ones that I took. Let's talk about estimated age or relative age. Clues to dates could be association with dated archaeological deposits, association with dated portable art, portrayals of datable objects, superimposition of designs, patination, and weathering. Association with dated portable art can be similar engraving designs between things like bone engravings and rock art. An example is in the Dalles with carvings from cremation burials being almost identical to nearby cliff petroglyphs. These are dated between 1700 CE and 1800 CE. For portrayal of datable objects, we have petroglyphs and pictographs on the Columbia Plateau that show horses, ships, guns, and so on that can be reliably dated. For example, we know approximately when horses were introduced, so if a horse is depicted, we know it was made in or after the historic period. Sometimes we can use time markers to infer an age range estimate like carvings of bow and arrows or atlatls. Superimposition of design or an overlapping figure must have been made more recently than the original. A series of superimpositions involving stylistically distinct examples can be useful in developing a generalized chronology for a region's rock art, since the relative ages of each style can be shown. Patination involves desert varnish, where petroglyphs are pecked through black or brown varnish that develops over the rocks. Over time, patina can form again over the petroglyphs. The repatinating can be used to create a relative chronology. Finally, we come to weathering. I feel like this is more close to absolute dating, but we're going to talk about it anyway. Weathering is another clue for general dating. The laws governing weathering processes are understood and rendered quantifiable. They permit the determination of relevant variables, most especially time. In that sense, many such phenomenon can be utilized to estimating the ages of geomorphic exposures such as petroglyphs. The Long Narrows was the term for part of the Dalles on the Columbia River. A series of basalt gorges formed steep-sided canyons through which the Columbia cascaded. These are now obliterated with the construction of the Dalles Dam. As in the central Columbia Plateau, dams along this stretch of the Columbia River have drowned more than half of the known rock art. At least 45 sites were completely or partially destroyed when the Dalles, John Day, and McNary dams were completed, and the reservoirs filled between 1955 and 1968. It is likely that other, smaller sites were obliterated before they were found and recorded. Large sites such as Petroglyph Canyon, Big Eddy, 4 O'Clock Rapids, and Blaylock Rapids were inundated following the construction of the Dalles and John Day dams. These sites were flooded before they could even be partially professionally recorded. Due to the construction of the Dalles Dam, the Yakima, Warm Springs, Umatilla, Nez Perce, and other unenrolled Native Americans lost a cultural and economic center that had supported Native American cultures for thousands of years. The flooding of Celilo Falls and the generation of power was hailed by many as progress, but it also transformed and transferred indigenous-owned resources to non-natives. In the 1950s, the Dalles was about 7,500 people, and many in the community held hopes that the dam would provide and support growth, expansion of the port, a modern bridge, production jobs, and low-cost electricity. Congress authorized the dam construction under the Flood Control Act of 1950. Because Celilo Falls and tribal villages would be submerged or partially flooded, it violated 1850s treaties. The federal government negotiated a settlement with the Warm Springs, Yakima, Umatilla, and Nez Perce tribes to compensate them for lost sites while fishing rights remained with the tribes. During the dam's construction between the 1930s and the 1950s, the federal government promised the Yakima, Warm Springs, Umatilla, and Nez Perce tribes they would permanently replace their villages and fishing sites. It took decades to fulfill this promise. The Army Corps of Engineers later acknowledged that the promise to build houses for displaced tribal members remained unfulfilled. You've spent this video looking at rock art as images on stone, but they were never just images. They were memory, identity, warning, spirituality, history, and connection to place. Along the lower Columbia Plateau, these cliffs and canyon walls held thousands of years of human expression. Every pecked line, every painted figure, and every weathered groove represented people who knew this landscape intimately, long before dams, highways, or modern borders existed. Much of this world now sits underwater. Sites that survived centuries of time vanished within years as the dams flooded entire cultural landscapes. Some rock art was recorded, but much of it disappeared before anyone could preserve it. Maybe the biggest question isn't just what was lost, but what the loss says about progress. The dams brought power and growth, but they also erased sacred cultural spaces indigenous people relied on for thousands of years, while the voices most affected were largely ignored. Today, these images are more than artifacts. They're proof of resilience, survival, and thousands of years of native history that still lives on through Yakima, Warm Springs, Umatilla, Nez Perce, and other indigenous communities. And maybe this is the lasting power of rock art. Long after the people who carved or painted these figures are gone, the images continued speaking. The real question is, are y'all listening or nah?